You're tuned in to More Living with Jim Brogan, broadcast live from the Brogan Financial Studios at News Talk 98.7, where old-fashioned values, expert knowledge, and genuine understanding come together to give you the retirement straight talk you deserve. Jim's a former National Advisor of the Year recipient and a financial educator, and he's here today to talk about how you can live out the best years of your life. Jim and the Brogan Financial team have been helping retirees and pre-retirees across the Southeast for over 20 years in their pursuit of financial independence. You can reach them during the week at 865-862-6800. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn, because More Living with Jim Brogan starts now.
Happy Saturday, East Tennessee, and welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. As you listen to News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Identity fraud and financial exploitation is not just the loss of money, but it's also lost time, damage to your credit, and lots of stress. According to AARP, American adults in 2023 lost a total of $43 billion with a B, $43 billion to identity fraud. Today our guest is Detective Mike Harper with the Knoxville Police Department. Detective Harper has been with KPD for over 30 years, and he's currently assigned as a detective in the Investigative Bureau, and he's an investigator of financial crimes, elder exploitation, and identity theft in Property Crimes Unit. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Bethel University and has spent the past 3 decades with agencies and with the community to investigate and prevent crime. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today, Detective Harper.
Well, thank you, Jim. I'm glad to be.
It's great to have you with us. Talk to us about how you got started in your career. I mean, I know you started off and went through various phases in your career with KPD. When did you get your start as a detective in the Fraud and Forgery Division?
Well, I began working fraud back in 2014 after being assigned to the Detective Bureau for about 9 years at that point. I started in 2005 moving with investigations.
Right, and you've been with KPD
a little over 30 years altogether, and an additional 3 years before that as a reserve officer. So technically I've been with them since 1991.
Now you instruct financial crimes and identity theft classes at the Knoxville Police Academy. So what things are you teaching police officers to be on the lookout for when it comes to financial crimes and identity theft? And it's, to my understanding, Mike, it's not just it's not just new officers. It's also current training for current officers.
That's right, Jim. We do teach the aspects of forgery and fraud investigation, as well as familiarizing new recruits with counterfeit currency they may encounter on calls for service. We familiarize them a little bit with long-term embezzlements and some elder abuse information, particularly in the financial part of that is what I teach.
Yeah, and of course at Brogan Financial, that's something we receive regular training on as well. We're, for some of our continuing education with Securities and Exchange Commission and their rules, certainly elder exploitation and financial fraud is a big thing. We're going to get into all that today. We are, Mike, fully in the technology age. So where, in your view, are people most vulnerable when it comes to technology?
Probably the fact that there are so many more people that are trying to take people's information through a variety of means, through infiltrating electronic emails. They're actually trying to take their information from databases. You hear about these data breaches all the time with large companies that can affect hundreds of people at once. We deal with the fallout of that all the time.
And it seems like people, I recently got a letter from an organization about being hacked and my data may have been compromised. I think I can't imagine anyone listening to this show hasn't received a letter like that at some point. and they often offer free credit monitoring. What do you think of the credit monitoring services that are out there?
I would highly recommend that if someone were to receive notification that they may have had their information taken, to conduct a credit check as soon as possible. Supposedly, if you contact one of the three main agencies, they'll notify the other two, but I have noticed that between the like Experian or TransUnion, they always seem to find different things in your credit, but they don't always return the same information. So, yes, I would definitely recommend checking credit as soon as possible if you get notified of that.
With these credit monitors, that's exactly right. I mean, we should be checking our own credit regularly. And typically, if we do a fraud alert or a freeze, can you talk about the difference between a fraud alert and a freeze on our credit?
So basically, a fraud alert will notify you of a person to use your information to make a purchase, such as applying for a loan or purchasing a vehicle or something of that nature. And a credit freeze will prevent anything from going through while you have it in place.
Right, so that's more stringent, but then that means, I mean, we have companies we work with all the time that we may not be aware, maybe routinely on an annual basis or so, check our credit, like, for example, our homeowners insurance. And they can't get it if we have a freeze, correct?
That's right. You have to
unfreeze
unfreeze it, yes.
Yeah. Now, typically, when someone's information has been compromised, the companies offer free credit monitoring for a year or two with a service. It might be Experian, it might be one of the other ones. It seems like more and more we get these letters, and I get more and more clients that are bringing this up to me, that they've been notified that their information was compromised on the dark web. So talk to us about the dark web and how big of an issue is that?
Well, from my understanding of it, the dark web is where the criminal element gets a lot of the information that has been stolen to further use it to commit crimes against people. That's kind of, if you will, a clearinghouse of that type of information for people that know how to access it.
And I guess people are selling that, they'll sell that data on the dark web as well, is that right?
Yes, sir. Usually the people that conduct the data breaches and other methods of obtaining the information aren't necessarily the people that use that information to further the crimes. The people that steal it initially tend to sell that information to other actors.
Right. And we just really have to be on the lookout. What would you say are some of the most important things we can be doing to monitor these kinds of things with all of our statements and our online access? What should we be monitoring? How regularly? Can you kind of walk us through some of that?
Well, yes. A lot of times on the cases I have worked, the people that have been victimized are unfortunately the folks that don't keep a close eye on their own activity in their accounts. And what I mean by that is, you used to get a monthly statement. A lot of folks would just spend a day going through their banking records and making sure things were okay on a monthly basis. You just can't do that anymore. Not if you want to catch somebody that has compromised your information. I would recommend checking it daily, if not more often, at least daily.
Oh, wow. That's quite a lot. What about our passwords? How often should we be changing our passwords?
A lot of companies and corporations require you to change a password anywhere from 30, 60, 90 days. That can also be a thing if you don't necessarily have a password recommendation or a requirement. I would do that probably at least 60 days.
And then I guess one thing we've seen more and more, and we've implemented even more and more in our business, is dual-factor authentication, which I'm a big fan of. Not everybody does that. Can you kind of walk our listeners through dual-factor authentication?
Yes, what that means is you have code sent mostly usually to your phone, which is a item you always have in your possession. You use the code that is sent to your phone to enter your account once you already entered the initial password. So you kind of go through two security checks to access your own information, but the second security check is done as locally as it can be, which is the device in your hand at the time.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. It can be a little bit of an irritation. Just about all of our systems at our work now are dual-factor authentication, even logging into our computers. And that's because of the need to protect that data and make sure that we're secure. We're visiting with Mike Harper this morning, detective with the Knoxville Police Department. We're talking about cybercrimes and identity theft. When we come back, we'll talk about, I want to get into a lot of other things, electronic payments, where are we most exposed, what about paper checks? So we'll dive into all of this in detail. So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm your host, Jim Brogan. We're with you every Saturday, 9 to 10 a.m. and again 3 to 4 p.m. We're visiting this morning with Detective Mike Harper with KPD, and he is he's in their Cybercrimes and Identity Theft detective. And Mike, I read recently, according to the Association of Fraud Professionals, paper checks account for less than 9% of payments, but 66% of payment fraud, which would suggest to me that paper checks are an easy target. Can you talk to us about paper checks?
Paper checks, while once a very common method of conducting business, has been on the decline, which would account for that 9%. You have more and more companies preferring other methods of payment. A lot of your banks will even offer incentives to have accounts that do not use paper checks, that use they're entirely used. A person uses the payment methods either online, peer-to-peer transactions, or a debit and credit card.
But then 66% of the payment fraud is coming for paper checks. So why are they so vulnerable?
Checks, on their nature, a lot of it is the fact that all of the information needed to compromise a check is right there. When you look at a check, when you look across that bottom line of the check, what's called a microline, you have three pieces of information, which is the check number, your account number, and also the routing number the bank uses to process the check. And that information is always right up front, right visible. And checks can be stolen from a variety of methods, from someone that gets close enough to get it, from the mail is what we're seeing quite a bit of nowadays. And once the check has been stolen, whether it's been processed or not, the person wants that information on the bottom line of the check so they can create additional checks that are counterfeit.
Sure.
That are fabricated.
And that makes perfect sense that it would be much, much easier to steal that kind of stuff. Talk to us about the importance of checking our mail regularly. Because, at this point, people don't, we don't depend on mail like we used to, but we're still exposed there. So can you talk to us about that?
So inbound and outbound mail both have vulnerabilities. We'll talk about the outbound mail first, and that is the mail that you may mail a check to a person on a regularly basis or maybe a one-time basis. It really doesn't matter. I would never put any form of payment, such as a check, in a mailbox outside one's residence, with a little flag up, because people will go around and steal it. It's not just limited to that. People will also target the blue mailboxes in front of the post offices. We've had incidents where people force entry into those mailboxes and steal all the mail out of it and go through it later and just get all the checks out of it that they can so that they can counterfeit those accounts.
Really? How frequently does that happen? That's kind of alarming.
That's actually kind of a trend we're seeing, or an uptick, I guess you'd say. It happens quite frequently. A person will file a crime report, and part of their report is that they took the check and put it in a post office box, in a blue box out from the post in the neighborhood or whatever. And sure enough, we find out later that the box has been broken into and all of the mail removed. And so obviously the people taking it will go through the mail and find what they want and use the information that they find.
Yeah, that's kind of scary because I always think of, we never mail stuff from our house. We always take it to, some sort of a drop box location. I didn't know that having those broken into was a fairly regular occurrence that's happening more and more. That's kind of scary. But let's talk about paying things electronically. As I said, paper checks only account for 9% of payments. Paying by credit card or things like Apple Pay, how secure is that? Is that a better option for paying for things?
I believe it is, because you have several monitoring systems in place, and you also have a lot of times that two-step authentication we were talking about earlier in place. You can also set up automatic payment if you wish. It's very convenient for the consumer to use those methods. And those methods are usually tracked a little bit closer, especially by reputable companies that offer that as part of their service, such as banks and large merchants such as Apple.
What about payment apps like Venmo, PayPal, Cash App? Are those pretty secure?
Overall, I would think so as well. The thing about those are often P2P or peer-to-peer transaction platforms. And the constant with those is the sender and receiver must know each other. And the reason I bring that up is you shouldn't use that platform to pay somebody you don't know, because if you are being scammed, usually part of the contract with those companies is that you have to know the person you're sending the money to, because they won't reimburse you if you send it to somebody you didn't mean to. They rely on the other person giving it back to you.
Because you know that person, so they kind of have some protocol there.
Yep.
When we're online and we're shopping online, how can we ensure that when we pay for something it doesn't lead to fraud? Like what are some signs we should be looking at? What about the website domain, or how things read in our toolbar? What are the things we should be looking at to protect our identity?
A lot of times people that do those types of schemes, I think you're talking about phishing schemes in particular. A person may send an email to you that looks like it's legitimate, and it may be off by one character and only one character in the email line. It could have a different domain. It could just have one letter difference in, the actual email address. But when you send something to that email address, it's not going where you think it is. It's going to the person that created that. And by nature, a person that creates a similar email to a legitimate one has bad intentions.
And I guess the other thing with phishing, not only the emails, but where, you get an email, you click on a link, and it goes to a website that's been built to look just like the real company's website, right?
We have had instances of that. That actually occurs in rental fraud, where people may be trying to buy or rent a home online, and they get diverted from a legitimate source page, the one exactly like you say, Jim, that's been constructed to look almost identical, and look really close at it to see the differences. Because as we were talking a few minutes ago, out of convenience and more stuff happening online, people actually purchase and rent houses almost entirely online, and they never see them until they own them.
Yeah, and you know what? With the VRBO and Airbnb, certainly short-term rentals, it's almost entirely done online. You don't even know the people.
Correct.
Now, you're kind of depending, I guess, on a company like VRBO or Airbnb. You're kind of depending on their security.
Yes.
But that's a great point, though.
You look at the website, and if something looks a little bit off to you, trust your instincts. If for some reason the website, especially when you've used a couple of times or several times before, something looks funny about it, it may be a simulated website put out there to try to get you to send money to it. With your information, once they have your information, they can get pretty much all they want.
Talk about people that email stuff. We all email stuff, But we have to be careful with what we include in those emails and whether they're encrypted or password protected. Talk a little bit about the importance of email security and protection and what we should be doing to guard our protection.
I think that when it comes to that, particularly emails, anything electronic, you can just consider that once it's out there forever. It's really hard to completely make something go away once it's been put on a public platform like that. I would think that any time, of course, we all know not to send our Social Security number on any platform like that, but if we send any kind of sensitive information like a partial account number or something, nothing is foolproof, but one can be a little bit more secure if instead of writing all the numbers down, they spell out a few of those within the number sequence. And that kind of defeats auto search engines that look for account numbers.
Yeah, I guess we just got to be smart about that stuff. I know that there are emailing tools. I know for example, with Microsoft Outlook, where you can encrypt that or protect that information, very easily, right? Are you familiar with some of those things that people can do to protect information, if they're sending some sensitive information?
They can. You look for websites that instead of like HTTP, it has an S at the end of it, and that denotes it to be a secure website. When the email line starts off, look for that to have the S on the end of it. That will denote that's a secure website. And also look at the domain to make sure that you're going to a reputable domain, because domains are limited to certain users.
Identity theft is a big problem here in America. According to AARP, American adults in 2023 lost a total of $43 billion, with a B, to identity fraud. We're visiting with KPD Detective Mike Harper and we're talking about cybercrimes and identity theft. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the scams that are going on right now. What should you be aware of when you get called by somebody who says it's their credit card company or your bank? What are some of the things we're seeing right now? So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
This is More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. We're visiting with Knoxville Police Department Detective Mike Harper. We're talking about cybercrimes and identity theft. And Mike, let's talk about when people prey on us. First, let's talk about when we get phone calls. I know that can be a particularly challenging thing when they say it's our credit card company or our bank. Talk a little bit about what's going on right now with that and what we can be doing to protect ourselves.
Okay, Jim. Kind of a common thread among these calls, and they can take a variety of backgrounds, such as, like you say, someone can call from your bank saying there's a problem. Someone can call saying they're with the utility board, saying they haven't received your payment, and they're threatening to cut your power off. Usually an authority figure of some type. People like to impersonate law enforcement and say they've missed court or they haven't shown up and they have a warrant for their arrest and they can, quote, take care of it right now if they pay them the fine and not have to be arrested. The common thread, if you will, among all of these is the caller creates an element of immediate stress on the person taking the call, the victim. And they create a sense of urgency, and it has to be dealt with right now, so they don't have a chance to talk to anybody and explain it and maybe get a second opinion on it. It's really hard to disregard those calls, but no law enforcement agency is going to call and do that, for one. And banks will tell you time and again they won't call unsolicited calls like that and ask for information from you. But unfortunately, when people are in that moment of stress, a lot of that goes out the window, and they want to take the immediate action to correct the problem as they perceive it. And that can be really hard.
I think one thing that's super important in that is, I remember a couple of years ago, I got called from the company that does my visa. And they were asking me a few questions, and it made me a little uncomfortable. So I just told him, I said, I'm going to hang up. I'm going to call the number on the back of my Visa. And so that's, and I hear that said a lot from people that work in your area is, anytime you get an alarming call that says it's urgent, you got to do this, got to do that, it's never a bad idea to just hang up and call the number that's on the back of the credit card or call your local bank that you know what the number is. Or if you're going to a website, you type in the physical address of what you know is the real address.
That's absolutely right. None of us will take it, I call people all the time and they want to verify my identity. And I say, just call the main police department. I won't even give you the number. Just look it up and verify who I am and call me back, or I'll call you back. There's people that are legitimate are not going to be offended by that.
No, absolutely not. And it turned out in that instance, it was actually legitimate. But, I think they just asked me maybe one or two extra security questions, and I'm like, well, they're calling me. I know they have to verify it's me, but they almost were asking too many questions for them to be calling me as opposed to me calling them. So it just kind of raised my antenna, and I was like, well, I'm going to hang up and call the number on the card.
It is always better to be safe than sorry on something like that. If you have any inkling that something's wrong, then go ahead and make that extra step, absolutely.
What are you seeing right now, Mike, in terms of common trends in, fraud and schemes and scams? What are some things you're seeing a lot of right now that we can be on the lookout for?
Well, we're seeing the phone calls start again. I don't know if they tend to be episodic or not, but it seems we'll go quite a while without a lot of those, and then all of a sudden we'll get a ton of them all at once, where people are trying both successfully and unsuccessfully to get people to give them money. And a very common theme is if anybody that is legitimate is not going to ask for your payment from like going down to a merchant, getting a whole bunch of gift cards and giving you the codes over the phone to them.
Sure.
So that's also something kind of be on the lookout for.
Mike, one thing that we hear more and more because we hear commercials for them is home title theft. And there's now monitoring bureaus that are trying to sell protection for home title theft. How common is that? And how should we be monitoring our home title, or even should we?
Well, that is kind of a new trend. That started, I guess, a year, maybe up to 2 years ago. What people will do is they will go and put themselves on your title or put a lien against it, especially if they see a property that's up for sale. They'll try to encumber it so that you can't sell it. Probably one of the best ways, and it doesn't cost anything, is you can go to the local Register of Deeds website here in Knox County, and you can sign up to have notification when there's any change made on your title that's on record.
Well, that sounds like a very easy idea, right? And can we do, or do all the surrounding counties do that as well?
Some do. I don't know that all do. Yeah, I don't know that all do, but I know that Knox County does, and we weren't the first in the area to do that. We kind of picked it up from one of the surrounding counties. I can't remember which one. But you can basically put notifications, like if you have your name and a second party's name, you can have separate notifications put in for any alert on any name, any change.
Well, that seems like a no-brainer to me. So you say Knox County for sure. I know I live in Blount County, so I may have had a little bit of, a little bit selfish interest in asking about the surrounding counties, but I definitely am going to be checking with my Register of Deeds next week. What is one of the biggest fraud or forgery cases you've worked on?
Well, I have had a couple of cases that went over $1 million. And usually cases like that are long-term embezzlements from companies that have been going on for many years. Usually we don't see that large of a figure on an immediate theft or something, or even a theft of only a month or two. But I've had a couple that the embezzlement went almost 20 years before it was discovered. And I think it was like $2.3 million on that one.
That's kind of scary. So do you mean an employee embezzling from their company?
Yes, sir. And usually it is the person in charge of the money that does it, unfortunately, also.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. Are there things that would alarm us, Mike, that maybe our identity has been stolen, besides the obvious of we're missing our money from the bank account or something like that?
If you're starting to have problems with your, say, your credit or debit card purchase, if it's not going through, if you're getting denials on things, that might be a red flag to go ahead and check immediately. And I can't impress enough how important it is to make the immediate action on these things, because a lot of these companies kind of require an immediate action in order to cooperate with you in reimbursing you if your funds are stolen. Kind of going back to what we said earlier, we kind of have to have an immediate response on that these days to get the full benefit of having our funds made whole.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And one of the things that I'll mention, talk about this often, is, if you haven't done this already, register to see, create your online account with Social Security Administration, and just make sure it's. They used to send out statements. They don't do that anymore. You have to get everything electronically. And sometimes people will they'll steal your identity and file for Social Security benefits, and you may not even know about it. And then you decide to file later, and they're like, well, you've been drawing the benefits. So it's important to do that too.
Yes, sir. We have seen that occur on a few occasions. Similar to that, we've had people will use another person's identity to create a temporary place of employment so they can get a paycheck or two. Usually folks that don't stay in an area too long do that, and people don't find out about that until they go to file their income taxes, and there's discrepancies on it.
Yeah, and then one of the common things I see as a business owner is where we get an email saying, and it's trying to act like it came from one of our employees, saying they need to change their banking information for direct deposit. So, always look at the email address of what you're getting and where it's coming from, and make sure, is that the correct email address? It may say their name, and they may say their name as a person, but is it the actual, or the company name, but is it the actual right email address?
And keep in mind, more and more these days, companies have names of their executives and their leadership available online, so it's not that hard to assume an identity of a person in charge of a company when they're reaching out to folks.
Yeah, and they can, I guess, establish a dummy email, put that name on it, and it's made to look like it's coming from that employee. So we just got to be smart about that. Always be paying attention. Is there something off with the email? Is the email always verify look at the address, not just the name of the person? There's just so many things. Oftentimes I'll get, and the way I have my emails displayed, Mike, it'll tell me their name, but it doesn't necessarily, I have to kind of hover over it to get it to me for it to pull up what that actual email address is. And so if I'm, especially if it's from a company that I'm just not sure about, I'll immediately go there, and check and see what is the actual email address. So we just have to be alert to that kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely. And if you're really in doubt, it doesn't hurt to pick up the phone and call them and make sure that way as well. If you have to do that.
Call the number, not necessarily in the email, but the number of what you know is the right number.
Yes, sir. Again, it's better to be safe than sorry on something like that, because it is so hard to get that stuff straightened out once you have been compromised. We're
visiting with Mike Harper. He is with the Knoxville Police Department, and we're talking about cybercrimes and identity theft. We hear about nightmare situations, Mike, where it takes someone years to fix their credit or clear their name if their identity has been stolen. So what can you do if you find out your identity's been stolen?
Again, with that credit check, you find out what your damage is to the best of your knowledge. You'll get collection letters often from people that say you owe them money. You may not find out even for months or even over a year after it happens, if you haven't been notified any other way. But I would dispute any transaction you didn't make with the person saying you owe them money directly in writing. I'd send them a notification that you didn't make this charge. You want this charge removed. You want any negative credit result from this charge not being paid removed from your credit. I would definitely do that with each and every creditor that may come to your door saying you owe money when you've had your identity stolen.
And I know many banks and credit unions now once you've logged in, they show you your credit score on your, they show it to you on there. And that's a good thing to always be tracking. If it all of a sudden drops 50 points, that could be an alarm that you might want to contact and see what's going on there.
Absolutely, because things like that are little clues, if you will, that there's something wrong. And it may not be the immediate notification or the fact that your card no longer works. It could be something very subtle like that you can pay attention to and have the first piece of knowledge that you need to do something to look into it.
And Mike, we talked about mail. Do you still see, and I know this is kind of old school, but do you still see dumpster diving?
Yes, it still happens. That's probably going to occur as long as a person gets any result whatsoever out of it, because it doesn't cost them anything. And really, if it's a dumpster on the side of the road or a trash receptacle, by nature, it's been discarded, and we really can't make them stop.
Really? So if somebody's going through a dumpster and a police officer happens upon it, you can't make the person stop?
Only if the person that owns the dumpster on the property, and it's a trespassing issue, then we can run them off in. But as far as going through trash on the side of the road, it's a lot more difficult to take a position with that.
Wow. But if it's on their property, you can. If it's not the owner, you can run them off.
Correct.
According to the National Council on Aging, older adults who are victims of financial abuse lose over $28 billion with a B each year. Why are older adults so vulnerable, and what are some of the scams you've been seeing lately with older adults?
Well, your older folks tend to be more vulnerable for a few reasons, and one is the fact that, and I consider myself among those numbers, is we're kind of brought up to trust folks a little bit more than people are nowadays, and people exploit that. They know that people are slow to hang up on people if they're persistent. They know that they don't like to tell them no, especially more than once. And instead of just hanging up the phone, they'll keep listening to them if they become pushy. And that's just one example. Your older population tends to have their life savings built up, so they've been working at building that nest egg for a longer period of time. And one of the worst things that we encounter is somebody that falls victim to a romance scam, because I think that's where your biggest losses come from. Online.
Yeah, that's kind of scary too. Just one last question here, Mike, about older adults. Talk about, if I have older parents or a listener has older parents, how can we that have older adults in our family recognize and identify potential signs of exploitation?
You might want to look for things like if they're not getting their bills paid on time when normally they have been able to, if they have somebody they trust to pay those bills, particularly another family member per se. And I hate to say it, but a lot of times it turns out the people that take advantage of these folks are people they trust, or they wouldn't be close to their money to start with. As far as that goes, you probably want to talk to your older parents or whoever they are. If they've recently started using the internet, they may not fully understand some of the dangers of that. When you take that in combination with the element that they trust folks, they can inadvertently really put themselves in a bad position if they're not careful.
Well, and then also, as people age, we're not at some point, we're not mentally as sharp as we were.
That's
so
correct.
It can just kind of be several things. Well, Detective Mike Harper with KPD, we've been talking about cybercrimes and identity theft, and of course you work in the fraud and forgery unit. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today and share with us your wisdom and knowledge.
You're very welcome, Jim. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely. That's Mike Harper. He's with the Knoxville Police Department. Identity theft, senior vulnerability, financial exploitation, all of these things are so critically important that we're aware for not only ourselves, but those that are close to us. Now, when we come back, we're going to have our dollars and cents segment. The IRS has released the new brackets, tax brackets for 2025, because there are cost of living adjustments. We call that bracket creep. Those brackets go up. We've also got a Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that is set to expire at the end of next year. What can you be doing to minimize your tax burden in the long term? What do you need to understand about things like bracket creep and about what's happening at the end of next year? So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
This is More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Thanks for tuning in this week. We've been talking about identity theft. It's so important to be aware of all those things. And for our dollars and cents segment, I want to talk a little bit about our current tax system. So when we look at our tax system, our income tax brackets go up every year, meaning the threshold of when we go from a 12% to a 22% marginal tax bracket, that number goes up every year for cost of living, for inflation. Okay? So typically, that's all built in because, when we have inflation, people are, everything's more expensive. Hopefully, we're making more money. Hopefully, if we're retired, we have an income plan that pays us more income. So we're doing all of those things. So our tax brackets, where we click into those brackets, should be going up every year. A couple things that I want you to be aware of is, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires at the end of next year. And, we look at those tax brackets, the 10% bracket's pretty much staying unchanged for the most part. The 12%'s going to 15. The 22%'s going to 25, and then it kind of goes on up from there. And we think in our minds, how big of an increase is that? Number one, we're going to feel that, but I also want you to remember that the standard deduction is getting cut essentially in half. The standard deduction for a joint filer for 2025 in the new tax rates that have been issued by IRS is $30,000. For a single, it's $15,000. Well, that's going to be essentially cut almost in half at the end of next year. So come 2026, if you're not itemizing, the typical family, U.S. family, whether you're single or working husband and wife joint, you're typically going to see about a $3,000 to $4,000 increase in your income taxes just from the standard deduction going down, just from that alone, if you're not itemizing. And that's a big deal. Think about that. $3,000 to $4,000 for the average household, typically. If you're in about a 22, maybe a 24% tax bracket, you're going to be looking at something in $3,000 to $4,000 in extra taxes just from the deduction changing. So we've got to be aware of those things. Now, retirement account contributions are supposed to be adjusted for inflation every year because that's such a great way to build money, either tax deferred or in the matter of a Roth, tax free. The limit for 401k contributions, employer accounts, 403bs, other employer plans, has gone up by $500. So it's now $31,000 with the catch-up provision, which is $7,500 if you're 50 and up. But the contribution limit for IRAs and Roth IRAs did not change. So it's still $7,500 with a $1,000 catch-up. So that did not change. And then the other thing you want to be aware of is they have not yet released the bands that determine, where however much income you make can determine if you pay a Medicare premium, an income-related Medicare adjustment. That can change. So it's just important to incorporate tax planning. We're going to have a tax increase in the next year. The removal of the reduction in the standard deduction is a big part of that. So don't let that catch you asleep. Be sure to do your tax planning. and stay on top of all of that. And this is a great time of year as we're going into 2025 to do that. Thank you for tuning in this week. This is More Living with Jim Brogan, right here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
The views expressed by Jim Brogan and his guests are not that of Cumulus Media. Any discussion of financial, legal, and tax planning strategies is not intended to be individualized advice and is general in nature. Always consult with your advisor for advice specific to your needs. This program's content does not represent a recommendation of any particular security, strategy, or investment by Jim Brogan or Brogan Financial Incorporated.